Our 250th birthday of the country, so we're going to do a little bit of stuff about the Revolutionary War. But before we do that, I do want to, hello Bob.
Hi.
I do want to tell you about coming attractions. Next month, August the 11th, we have the world-renowned author, Roger Moon, sitting right back there. Roger Moon's going to share some information about the life of William Jenner, which I think is the person that had the highest political office in this area, because he was in the Senate. William English has connections to English, but he was only in the House of Representatives. So it'll be about William Jenner and his life. And then on September the 8th, we're going to have Polly Stevenson Moore here sharing stories and pictures about Leavenworth, local history, and Stevenson's store and the history of that store. I want to tell you, Sherry and I went to Polly's house a week ago and helped put together pictures for the presentation. My goodness, Polly has a lot of amazing pictures. It was really interesting, so we'll see some. October 13th is almost Halloween time, and so that's going to be, here, this is the homework. Between now and October 13th, think of some ghost stories, some weird stories, some strange things you've seen or done or heard, because we're going to share stories related to Halloween that night, and our customs as well. And then on November the 10th, we're going to do one more thing about sort of America's 250 celebration, except we're going to focus that night on Civil War soldiers, Civil War times here in Crawford County. As it turns out, Crawford County has a lot of Civil War related history and connections. So that's what's coming up. Now, in the meantime, tonight, we've got two sections to this. First of all, did you know we had Revolutionary War veterans in Crawford County, or did have? I was surprised at how many there are. Is Roberta Toby?
No, she's sick. She ain't gonna be able to be here tonight.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, because she's really the person that made this information possible, pulled it together. So we're going to talk about first the Revolutionary War soldiers connected to our county, and then we're going to talk about patriotic songs of the United States. So let's dig right into this. Now, the colonies was a little bit different setup than what we think about the United States today. And of course, there were the 13 colonies along the coast, the Atlantic coast. But for instance, look in the middle. Look at Virginia. Look where Virginia goes. All the way to the Mississippi River. So if we were going across the river to what is now Kentucky, it would have been Virginia. And then on our side of the Ohio River, there is no Indiana there. We're the Northwest Territory. So that's where we are. Now, a lot of people think about the Revolutionary War, and they think about the war being fought in the 13 colonies. And I guess they were, really. However, there was also a Western front of the Revolutionary War, and we're going to hear about some of these soldiers that were serving in the West here, like the George Rogers Park, amongst this group. Hello, cousin.
Hello.
Okay, now, but let's think a little bit about what would it have been like to live in the colonies in the 1770s. Well, first of all, think about the state of medicine. There weren't a lot of doctors, there weren't many hospitals, and people didn't know anything about germs or sterile surgical techniques. You need to hack off an arm or a leg, get out the saw and chop it off. No antibiotics, no anesthetics. I am glad I didn't live. Which also leads to the life expectancy. Look at that. 30 to 40 years, that was it. That was sort of the average. And the major causes of death, well, you can see the list there. There were things like smallpox and tuberculosis. By the way, in looking at death records of a lot of my ancestors that go back into the late 1800s, early 1900s, TB was pretty common around here in recent years. Pneumonia, dysentery, malaria, childbirth complications, wound infections, and get this, 10 to 30% of infants died in their first year in many communities. Childbirth was a dangerous situation. So medical care, it was a little bit tougher then. And now some Revolutionary War facts. Well, it started in 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord, and it sort of grew. And then all of a sudden there's this people getting around the idea of maybe we should be an independent country. And 1776 is the Declaration that we talk about so often. And it wasn't until 1781 that General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, but that wasn't the end of it, because it wasn't until 1783 that the war actually ended with the treaty in Paris. And over that time, there were 230,000 Americans that served in the Continental Army. That's about 10% of the population of the country at that time. So a lot of people. But it was a different kind of service that you're going to see in some of the examples from Crawford County. There were 6,800 combat deaths, but 17,000 died from disease. And you can sort of understand that based on the medical care situation. So when we say freedom wasn't free, this was a great example of it. Now, I've got 24 Revolutionary War veterans with ties to Crawford County. In almost every case, they ended up serving in the Revolutionary War and ended up coming and settling here when it was essentially a wild territory. And all this information has been put together by Roberta Toby, which is why if she was here, I was going to thank her and hope she gets better real fast. That gray cabinet back there, on the end it says military records. That's where there's a binder with all this Revolutionary War stuff in it. And she has put together binders for almost every conflict. So if you want to check war records related to Crawford County, she's done a great job there. So let's talk about these 24. Well, the first, there's no chance you're going to read that, right? But first I got to say, look at that. You got the redcoats all lined up, and you got the colonists here, and the idea of standing up and shooting at each other sort of boggles my mind.
I know.
But, wow, this is dark. There's Joseph Baldwin, who was born in Virginia. He died in Crawford County. Timothy Bennett from New York came to Crawford County. And Alexander Black. Now I want to read you something about Alexander Black. He served in scouting parties. In one case, they pursued Indians who had killed a settler and kidnapped the wife and 2 children. He and 14 others pursued them 3 days, wounded several Indians, and recovered the hostages and rescued them. He later moved to Crawford County. We think of fighting the British, but the British were aligned with the Native Americans, and so we were sort of fighting 2 fronts at the same time there.
Hey, John, when was Crawford County established?
1818.
1818.
The state became a state in 1816, that's 2 years later. Now, the next ones, and by the way, if you know of any of the families that are descended from these folks, let us know. That would be interesting.
Well, I was gonna ask if you knew, like the Bennett, did you know who came after them or no?
I haven't looked through that, but I think that would be wonderful, because I think a lot of us are connected to Revolutionary War soldiers and may not even know it. So here we have William Campbell. He was born in Virginia. Now, this is interesting. He served 6 weeks in one group, and then he served 10 days to be in a couple of battles, and then later he served in the 10th North Carolina Regiment in a shoe factory until he was discharged in 1782. Now, this is one of the trends that I thought was interesting. It wasn't as if they signed up for the military and served a year or 2 or 3. Many of these cases you'll find they would go in for a few weeks, fight a few battles or do some scouting, go back home, take care of the farm and the family, go back and serve a few weeks or months, go back, take care of home. Because they were truly citizen soldiers. They had to take care of their family and farm as they were also fighting this war. It was a huge commitment. There was William Chandley from Virginia and Samuel Chapin from Massachusetts. And for Samuel, I counted 6 terms of service lasting from 5 days to 6 months. So it's that in and out, off to war. Now, next set of people, you see these pictures. Icy, cold water, swampy area. Well, that's got some real connections to us. This is Henry Funk. He enlisted from the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and he served in Colonel George Rogers Clark's Virginia Regiment. And remember, George Rogers Clark has got a bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff in Indiana and Kentucky. Why? Because Virginia went all the way to the Mississippi. Now I want to read a story here related to Henry Funk. This is from an affidavit he filed to get benefits for his service. When Clark's army arrived at Vincennes and were about to go out to Kaskaskia, there was at that place a French lad of about 14 years old whose father and all the family except himself had been massacred by the Indians. This lad, 14 years old, this lad volunteered and joined Clark's army and went with them to Kaskaskia, at which place he recognized among the Indians the man that had killed his father's family and asked liberty to take vengeance, which I remember was granted him, or at least that he did it whether by permission or not, and that he said Henry Funk was present when the lad killed him. So justice was different. That was Henry Funk, who later moved to Crawford County. Now, Elijah Dimbo. Elijah Dimbo entered service from New Hampshire. He was in the Battle of Bunker Hill. We all know about that as we were learning history. He also later served in the Indian War from 1781 to 1785. He's buried in the Dimbo Cemetery, just over there outside of town. And that's his marker. And then Casper Kemp, who is buried near Alton. Now here's Reuben Kemp, who is near and dear to me and my wife, because this is my wife, Sherry's 4th great-grandfather. He served, there's a lot of information available. If you've got an ancestor that served with George Rogers Clark, there's a lot of information there. So dig it up, they're great stories too. Reuben Kemp served with George Rogers Clark's group, much in in what is now Kentucky, but was then Virginia. They tried to establish a fort along the Mississippi River, had a hard time doing it. A lot of Indian attacks. While there, he got sick, and in one of the records of the fort and its operations, it's a record of giving some extra sugar to Reuben Kemp because he was sick. Now that's the kind of medicine I can get behind. So that's Reuben Kemp. Now, the next one here is George Keysacker. I hadn't heard that name before. He's from Virginia. He moved to Westport here in Crawford County. His parents had immigrated from Germany. It says, quote, he enlisted, quote, about the beginning of harvest, 1781. Their whole lives, many of them, were centered around farms, harvest, that sort of thing. And his service included ferrying troops and wagons across two particular rivers. And he ferried George Washington across the river once. So I'm sure that was exciting. Wouldn't you like to talk to him and hear the stories from him? Let's see. Now we go to Caleb Longest, born in Virginia, served from North Carolina. Archibald Neal. Let me tell you a little bit about Archibald Neal. He was born in 1751, died about 1840 here in the county. He served from Pennsylvania. In an affidavit he filed here in Crawford County in 1820, an affidavit on his service, he says that his income was derived from one old mare, a colt, 2 cows, 2 calves, 1 sow, 9 pigs, 4 sheep, 3 chairs, 1 broken kettle, 1 oven, 1 skillet, 1 small pot, 1 water bucket, 1 small pail, 3 plates and cups, and 1 broken glass. Now think, if you had to inventory your stuff, could you put it in 3 lines? His occupation was weaver, but he hadn't been able to work for 20 years due to his health. And that's another thing to remember. What was the safety net for people in those days? Well, it was family, church, friends, community. That was it. There wasn't any government program for them. And then the last one on this sheet is Samuel Pindock. He was from Rhode Island. He served at the siege of Yorktown and the surrender of Cornwallis. And he's buried in Marengo. And that's a picture depicting the surrender of Cornwallis to Washington and his general. Okay, now we're getting toward the end here. We've got James Pearson from Salisbury, North Carolina. That's close to Charlotte, just on the outskirts. He was stationed at Carter's Fort to guard against attack of the Cherokee Indians. Thomas Reed, the second one here, he was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country we would think of now. He served 2 months, he served 5 different times for a few months at a time in his service. So another example of that, they go in and out, serve and go home, serve and go home. And William Roberts, Bob, maybe one of your relatives, huh? William Roberts, he was, he was enlisted as a private at Wilkes Courthouse in North Carolina. He served 3 months, volunteered again, went out, volunteered again, went out, volunteered again. He served 5 times. He was at the surrender of Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. So he saw an amazing event, was part of it. Now, Peter Rothrock, that's a familiar name to us. This Peter Rothrock was from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. We lived there. He's buried in Wyandotte, Crawford County. And William Rouse served in the Pennsylvania Continental Army for a year. Did you know there were so many Revolutionary War soldiers here? They were adventuresome souls to come here to this wild area at that point. And look at that honor guard here. That is actually the honor guard that came to commemorate and in respect of John Ruth. John Ruth was from Virginia. He's buried in the Haskins Mount Eden Cemetery in Crawford County, and he served under George Rogers Clark, one of many. Does anybody know where the Haskins Mount Eden Cemetery is?
You go along,
No, it's,
you go up. Road that turns to quarry,
uh-huh.
Anchorage Quarry, and goes back there so far, and then you go down over, way back in there.
Okay, over in that area, okay. I know the area.
I was there when they had that.
Oh, you were there. That's what I wondered. I thought you would be.
Yeah.
Now, John Scott. Okay, look at this scene here. The British ships out there pounding away at the colonists. John Scott was born in Ireland. So he starts in Ireland. He arrives in Charleston, South Carolina in 1770, and 6 years after he arrives here, at the age of 22, he was in the Battle of Sullivan's Island. There's an amazing story to read about if you want to read about an interesting battle. And he was also in the Siege of Savannah, the battles of Black Mingo, Kings Mountain, the Battle of Eutaw Springs, and then he came and lived in Crawford County. And Jacob Strauss from Virginia, we're not sure, but there's a Jacob Strauss that was buried at the Crawford County Poor Farm. Is this him? We don't know. Now, Constant Williams, I've never heard that as a first name for a man. I've heard of Constance for a woman, but Constant Williams, he was born in Connecticut. He was in the Battle of White Plains at Saratoga, where General Burgoyne was captured, which is another really interesting story. And get this, for a time he was in a scouting party that was called the Cowboys. They had cowboys in the Revolutionary War. He was granted a $30 per year pension, which was pretty good, I guess, $30 per year pension. He's buried in the Cedar Cemetery in Leavenworth, right across from the elementary school there.
That's my fourth great-grandfather.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He was like, well, how old was he when he married? He wasn't very old, however long that is.
Yeah, born in 1763.
Yes, 13.
13.
Yeah, his father, Nehemiah,
Yeah.
was also served. Nehemiah was in the battle with Burgoyne as well. And they lived just across the state line from Vermont, Canal. And they there's a written story about it that I found, that they captured Burgoyne and marched him past their house, and his wife and kids were looking out the window at Dad and brother marching him down the road, so it's kind of fun.
Did you know he was a cowboy?
I did.
Yeah. See, I didn't know that term was even used in those days.
Well, it's in his record for pension.
Yeah, that's where I found it too. Yeah.
Jim Kaiser, he lives on the old William Place, or he did live on the old William Place where he died.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Jim Kaiser.
Now, Jeremiah Wright was from Virginia. He was part of George Rogers Clark's group. Talks about going down from the falls of the Ohio, and he was an Indian spy. He's buried at the Fredonia Cemetery. And lastly, we have, that's our 24 patriots that we know of, 24 out of 230,000, but I'm amazed that they came to this wild territory to settle. And I'm glad they did, because Reuben Clark brought me my wife. You're here because of yours, and who knows, many of us are also probably here. Bob Roberts. Bob, thanks for giving this thing to Bill. He passed it on.
Okay.
It's a list of, if you served in the Revolutionary War, you might be granted land. If you were a sailor or a soldier, about 100 acres. And then it goes on, non-commissioned officers up to 400 acres, a surgeon 2,600 to 8,000 acres. The Major General gets up to 17,500 acres. I'd like to see him clear that land. Okay, so thinking about these Revolutionary War soldiers and patriots made me think about, do I take this country for granted? I hope not, because they were brave, intrepid, courageous people, and their families that supported them. And it's up to us now to sort of keep that fire going and pass it on to the next generation. But I am glad that we are commemorating this 250th birthday, because our country is worth saving and promoting and keeping strong and free. Now, in this vein, we're going to talk about one other topic tonight, which is patriotic songs. This is shorter. Frank, I should have had you sing them.
Go, please.
I tried to get Sherry to sing the anthem, but she didn't agree to. Okay, now, this scene is Fort McHenry, Baltimore Harbor, in the War of 1812. Now look, as soon as the British give up in Paris, it's not just a handful of years later that the War of 1812 starts, which is sort of the second war for independence for us. It's where they burned the White House and all those good things, right? So, what about the songs of the time? Well, there were patriotic songs. Yankee Doodle was a good one. The soldiers loved to sing it, and turns out that Yankee Doodle was written by some British officers making fun of the Revolutionary soldiers. Oh, Americans, as we are, just decided, well, I think we like that song, and they started singing it. And I love that. As a matter of fact, when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, what did the colonial troops sing? Yankee Doodle. Thank you, sir, for that song you created for us. The other songs that were most popular at the time were the Liberty Song. I don't know how that one goes. And Chester. Now, Chester, I wish we could hear it, and the lyrics, but that became the unofficial anthem of the Continental Army. But where is the Star Spangled Banner? Well, remember, the Star Spangled Banner wasn't even born until after the Revolutionary War. And here's how that happened. So,
John, I pulled that song up on YouTube. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Chester. It's
go ahead.
2 minutes long, so it ain't that long here.
Okay, go for it.
Please give us the song, Chester.
Then you got your fiddle.
easier to sing too. The national anthem is tough. Now, anyhow, how did it come to be? So take yourself back to September the 13th, 1814. U.S. soldiers at Baltimore Harbor's Fort McHenry. You can go there today. It's a great place to visit. And they had just withstood 25 hours of bombardment from British naval vessels. It must have been horrific. The next morning, they hoist up in Fort McHenry this great big flag. And that was one of the turning points of the War of 1812 and the Second War of American Independence. Now, a Maryland-born attorney was on a ship in the harbor watching all of this. And he was really excited that next morning his sun comes up to see the stars, the banner waving there. So excited and inspired that on the back of a letter, he starts writing what we now know as the Star-Spangled Banner. But it wasn't called that then, and he ended up with 4 verses. Okay, so here's what happens. That's Francis Scott Key there. He's a fairly young man, as you can tell, and he's on this ship and watching Fort McHenry being bombarded. Now, George Armistead is the major in charge of the the American port, Fort McHenry. And he wants a flag big enough for the British to be able to see it, a big one. As a matter of fact, I quote, "It is my desire to have a flag so large that the British will have no difficulty seeing it from a distance." I love that attitude. He hired a 37-year-old widow, Mary Young Pickersgill, to make a 30-foot by 42-foot flag. Can you imagine sewing that? The stars were 2 feet in diameter, the stars. 15 of them, by the way, because there were 15 states at this point. She used 300 yards of English wool bunting to make that flag, and it took 6 weeks. A lot of sore fingers, her and her daughters and helpers.
Her house probably wasn't that big, she had to be in the yard, right?
She had to go to a factory warehouse building, actually, because it was so big. It's a great story. Here's a picture of some of the lyrics that Francis Scott Key wrote. And so there was a local printer that printed the song, and they originally called it Defense of Fort McHenry. Well, by November of 1814, 2 months later, somebody had changed the name to the Star-Spangled Banner. So that's where that came from. And the melody that Key assigned to it was an old English drinking song. So that's where the tune came from. Now, at first, the Star-Spangled Banner gained popularity, but it was after the Civil War that the song really took hold. So it's after the Civil War, after 1865. The American flag became increasingly a symbol of national unity, and by the 1890s, the military had adopted it for ceremonial purposes. But it wasn't until 1916, isn't that amazing? It's 100 years later. Woodrow Wilson signs an executive order designating it the national anthem, and it wasn't until, oh well, that comes later. Now this next, because the Congress still hasn't acted on it. Now, this was fun to learn about. The Star-Spangled Banner made its sporting event debut in September of 1918. It was a World Series game between the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Red Sox. Wonder who won. I bet it wasn't the Cubs. And, you know, this was right after World War I. There had been some violent riots in Chicago. A bomb had torn apart a federal building the day before. During the 7th inning stretch, which apparently was already a thing, the military band on hand struck up the Star-Spangled Banner, and in a moving spectacle, players and fans alike fell silent and saluted the flag. Well, that practice spread across Major League Baseball and became a tradition. And then in 1931, more than 100 years after it was composed, Congress made it the official national anthem of the United States of America. So, that is the rest of the story about the Star Spangled Banner. And I thank you all for your attentions, and may we reverence and take good care of our country.